Thank you. Good afternoon. Ooh, that was dismal. I'm sorry, friends. Good afternoon. Hey, now we're awake. I'm Brother Zachary Stevens-Walter, the chaplain for pastoral care here at the community church, and I welcome you on behalf of our ministry team, our staff, and all our lay leaders. It is good to be together, both in person and online. Community Church is a multiracial, multicultural, multi-generational congregation with a vision and commitment to build a world grounded in equity and inclusion. With me today is our Director of Music, Jerry Brown, our musician in residence, Darnell White, as well as our talented choir. Community Church is in transition. We have sold our church building and are in the process of finding another in this neighborhood. We are guests here at the Church of the Incarnation in the meantime, for which we are grateful, even if this beautiful space isn't perfectly reflective of our Unitarian Universalist theology. Children are always welcome during worship. Feel free to move about our space. The sound of babies crying or children fidgeting, just about anyone fidgeting, is a beautiful part of being in community. Children are also welcome to join programming happening upstairs in the loft. Today's service is in recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day and is entitled, Give It Back. Please rise in body or spirit and join me for our opening hymn, The Fire of Commitment, number 1028 in the Teal hymnal. Thank you. Our call to worship this morning is a repeat after me prayer. I add my breath to your breath. I add my breath to your breath, that we might breathe as one people. That we might breathe as one people. I add my breath to your breath. I add my breath to your breath, that we might breathe as one people. That we might breathe as one people. I add my breath to your breath. I add my breath to your breath, that we might breathe as one people. That we might breathe as one people. I add my breath to your breath. I add my breath to your breath, that we might breathe as one people. That we might breathe as one people. We now light our chalice, beginning with a sung chalice lighting. Please join me with the chalice lighting words found in your program. We light this candle, the flame of our heritage. May it ignite hope in our lives, in our community, and in the world. Please join me now in reciting our unison affirmation, also found in your bulletin. Unto the Church Universal, which is the depository of all ancient wisdom and the school of all modern thought, which recognizes in all prophets a harmony, in all scriptures a unity, and through all dispensations a continuity, which abjures all that separates and divides, and always magnifies humanity and peace, which seeks truth in freedom, justice in love, and individual discipline in social duty, and which shall make of all persons one beloved community. Unto this church and unto all its members, known and unknown throughout the world, we pledge the allegiance of our hands and hearts. Amen. Please join me in reciting our land acknowledgement found in your bulletin. We are gathered on the unceded land of the Lenape peoples. We acknowledge the Lenape community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Now is the time in our service set aside to greet one another. Please share a COVID-safe sign of greeting with your neighbors. Thank you. Now begins our time of centering. We will begin with the sound of the chime, followed by a moment of silence. And then I will share a prayer, a written prayer that was written for Indigenous Peoples Day by our own Reverend Jude Geiger back in 2017. It is entitled, "Teach Us to Remember Our History." We begin with the sound of a chime. Spirit of life, God of many names, source of hope, we come together at the end of another week, some worn down by struggles of health, of home, of work. May we be a community that makes space for the sharing of joys and sorrows, angers and hopes, with grace and forbearance. In our nation's life, we pause this holiday weekend to remember the native lives lost from the European colonization on what is now our soil. Teach us to remember our history. Though we cannot make amends for all that has come before, may we learn from those ways, never to repeat them in our lives today. May we develop new ways of relating to neighbor and stranger, without violence or coercion, deceit or greed. Mother of grace, help us to find a sense of humility where we have privilege, and strength where we face oppression. In our struggles, we may learn compassion, and in our power, may we learn temperance. As a community of faith, may we be a safe harbor in a world that is often harsh towards indifference. Challenge us to use our presence as a healing force for justice and equity, knowing that although we have come far in the civil rights struggles of our times, there are many people still left behind. The work of building the beloved community is just as pressing as ever before. Amen. Ashe, and blessed be. Please join me in receiving our musical meditation, Filled with Loving Kindness, found in the Teal hymnal number 1031. Our reading this afternoon is an excerpt from Canaanites, Cowboys, and Indians, Deliverance, Conquest, and Liberation Theology Today by Robert Allen Warrior. It was originally printed in Christianity and Crisis on September 11th, 1989. Native American theology of liberation has a nice ring to it. Politically active Christians in the U.S. have been bandying about the idea of such a theology for several years now, encouraging Indians to develop it. There are theologies of liberation for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, women, Asian Americans, even for Jews. Why not Native Americans? Christians recognize that American injustice on this continent began nearly 500 years ago with the oppression of its indigenous people, and that justice for American Indians is a fundamental part of broader social struggle. The church's complicity in much of the violence perpetrated on Indians makes this realization even clearer. So, there are a lot of well-intentioned Christians looking for some way to include natives in their political action. For Native Americans involved in political struggle, the participation of church people is often an attractive proposition. Churches have financial, political, and institutional resources that many Indian activists would dearly love to have at their disposal. Since American Indians have a relatively small population base and few financial resources, assistance from churches can be of great help in gaining the attention of the public, the media, and the government. It sounds like the perfect marriage. Christians with the desire to include Native Americans in their struggle for justice, and Indians, activists in need of resources and support. Well, speaking as the product of a marriage between an Indian and a white, I can tell you it is not as easy as it sounds. The inclusion of Native Americans in Christian political praxis is difficult, even dangerous. Christians have a different way of going about the struggle for justice than most Native Americans. Different models of leadership, different ways of making decisions, different ways of viewing the relationship between politics and religion. These differences have gone all but unnoticed in the history of church involvement in American Indian affairs. Liberals and conservatives alike have too often surveyed the conditions of Native Americans and decided to come to the rescue, always using their methods, their ideas, their programs. The idea that Indians might know best how to address their own problems is seemingly lost on these well-meaning folks. Still, the time does seem ripe to find a new way for Indians and Christians, and most importantly, Native American Christians, to become partners in the struggle against injustice and economic and racial oppression. This is a new era for both the church and for Native Americans. Christians are breaking away from their liberal moorings and looking for a more effective means of social and political engagement. Indians in this era of self-determination have verified for themselves and the government that they are the people best able to address these problems, as long as Indians are given the necessary resources. If they can hold the U.S. government accountable to these policies. But an enormous stumbling block immediately presents itself. Most of the liberation theologies that have emerged from these communities have become preoccupied with the Exodus story. So ends our reading. Please join me now in our musical response, hymn number 1040 in your teal hymnal, Hush. Thank you. I want to try one more time now that our gathering has grown. Good afternoon, church. Good afternoon. Thank you. Well, today, on Indigenous Peoples Day, I feel a bit like Eeyore. Eeyore, the donkey, a friend of Winnie the Pooh, when greeted in this way, is fond of replying, "If it is a good afternoon," which I doubt. You know what I'm talking about? Well, we live in a time when great violence befalls small people. I tried real hard to come up with a kind, happy, gentle message for today. But you know what? The heavy machinery of war clamped down on adults and children alike. And I came up empty. I'm thinking today of my dear cousin, 10 years my junior, who is still in prison. I'm thinking today of my sister, who survived a car accident yesterday. I'm thinking of those of us who are not simply my immediate family, living in pain, healing, growing healthier, yet still troubled and still lonely. Church, you do not need me to tell you our work at building a world with love at the center is still incomplete. As I mentioned, today is Indigenous Peoples Day. Now, when my 13-year-old daughter came home from school last week, she told me that she would be off from school this coming Monday, that's tomorrow, on Monday, for Italian Heritage Day. Now, I know that last year President Biden announced that this day would be known as Indigenous Peoples Day. It was formulated into a national holiday. I imagine that honoring Italian Heritage Day today is particularly attractive for those of us with Italian heritage. We all have so much ancestry. We all are blessed with the ancestry of each other. There are so many blessings for our cultural richness that there are just not enough days to celebrate it all. In my opinion, and it's not just an opinion, people are all people. There are many of us, and many of our histories and ancestry is easy or difficult to celebrate for different reasons, but either way, irregardless, people are all people. Our differences do not make us different kinds of people. We must remember all of this history as people to remember why this is so important. Today, in particular, we remember that there are not different kinds of people, that Italians are not a different kind of person than an indigenous American, that Black Americans are not a different species than white Americans, and that differences between families and cultures certainly exist, but not as different kinds. We are not different kinds of people. And to celebrate one of our histories is to celebrate all of our diversity. The textured web of history that brings us into the fullness of human community is all of our inheritance. Church, I want to tell you that this morning, one reason I feel like Eeyore is because I woke up and my body hurt. I have aches and pains right now, all on my right side and in my hands from using a cane to help me walk. I'm using a cane to help me walk sometimes because an old injury from high school has cropped up in my left foot. When my body naturally responds to this old injury, I overcompensate with my right foot, and I end up with pain in both of my feet. I'll tell you, last night, my 7-year-old was struggling with illness. For that reason, he's not here with us today. And so, for his father today, having not quite slept enough, I have a gentle headache. I will say it's true to you all today that I ache from my head to my toes. I recognize that I am just one person, and I have a regular old body, and that all people have to deal with these sorts of issues at some point in their own way too. You can say amen to that, church, if you want. That is what bodies do, or so I've been told. They hurt. And as we age, it seems we collect more and more of these little hurts. Be ready, my friends tell me. Every person with more years than I, it seems, who hears my silly little ailments encourages me with the same motivational equivalent of, don't worry, it only gets worse. Wait until your first real surgery, they tell me. You know, the kind with months of intensive care that follows. Wait until your back. Wait until your hips. Wait until the shoulders. Church, I tell you all of this not to point to my pain or remind you of yours, but to acknowledge another aspect of human life that unites each and every one of us. We are limited to our physical, ailing, flesh and blood bodies, every single one of us. It's part of what makes us people. And we must remember that there are not different kinds of bodies, there are different bodies. Different people who have different bodies, not different kinds. Italian bodies are not a different kind of body than an indigenous body. A black body is not a different kind of body than a white body. There are just bodies. Differences between families and cultures exist, of course, but we are not different kinds of people. Sometimes it helps to get a little perspective on the problems we deal with. You see, it's now the year 2023. In 1953, 70 years ago, the struggle looked only a little bit different than it does now. See, 70 years ago, my mother was not yet born, but my father was. My grandparents on both sides struggled to survive in a world that I now know very little about. One set of grandparents were black, discovering the variety of implications of their blackness in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or Dallas, Texas. My other set of grandparents were Irish Catholic, struggling to understand what it meant to be Irish Catholic in northern New Jersey, Bergen County, to be specific. 70 years ago, power was at stake for both of them. The vicious attitudes and desires of empires governed the lives of the many, and especially the poor. This is not the first time, friends, that the world was ending. The same questions then were on everyone's mind, too. How do we survive the heavy hand of organized violence? How do we survive the tyranny of the war machine? How do we live when the world is crumbling under our feet? How do we take care of our elders and children? How do we take care of ourselves? And how do we entrust one another to take care of us when we need it, if folks can't even take care of themselves? To this context, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught that love is understanding, redeeming goodwill for all, an overflowing love which is purely spontaneous, unmotivated, grounded, and creative. The love of God operating in the human heart, agape love, does not begin by discriminating between worthy and unworthy people. It begins by loving others for their sakes and making no distinction between the friend and the enemy. Agape love is directed toward both. Agape is love seeking to preserve and create community. There are not different kinds of people. Church, it is both unkind and unwise to celebrate Italian Heritage Day without acknowledging that when Rome was founded as a kingdom, that was 753 BC, it became a republic in 509 BC. This new Roman Republic unified Italy through force of war and domination, forming a confederation of the Italic peoples. Again, not different kinds of people, just a specific flesh and blood community and flesh and blood communities. They rose and dominated all of Western Europe, Northern Africa, and the Near East. After the assassination of Julius Caesar, the Roman Empire continued this forced deference across the Mediterranean through centuries until the fall of Rome in AD 476. Italy was then fragmented into numerous city-states and regional polities until the unification of the country in 1871 under the hand of Napoleon. In fact, when our country was established, the United States, Italy was not a unified country. Please excuse me with these gross simplifications of European history, but what is important for me to lift up is that these 300 years ago, power was at stake. The vicious attitudes and desires of empires governed the lives of the many and the poor, and this was not the first time the world was ending. 300 years ago, the same questions were on their mind as they were on our minds today and as they were on Americans 70 years ago. How do we survive the tyranny of the war machine? How do we survive the heavy hand of organized violence? How do we live when the world crumbles under our feet? How do we take care of our elders and children? How do we take care of ourselves? And how do we trust one another to take care of us when we will need it, if folks can't even take care of themselves? These are the same questions, the same problems. I want to return to the words of Reverend King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., encouraging us by reminding us that a true revolution of values will lay hands on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This way of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poison, the drugs of hate, into the veins of peoples normally humane, sending people home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped, psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom. It cannot be reconciled with justice, and it cannot be reconciled with love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Dr. King wrote those words 70 years ago, and they still apply. In his 1963 sermon, Loving Your Enemies, Dr. King addressed the role of unconditional love in struggling for the beloved community. And if you don't remember, we just talked about the beloved community in our unison affirmation. It is the work that our hands and hearts are now bound to. Dr. King tells us, with every ounce of our energy, we must continue to rid this nation of the incubus of segregation. We shall not in the process relinquish our privilege and our obligation to love. While abhorring segregation, we shall love the segregationist. This is the only way to create the beloved community. Why? Because, friends, we are all people. There are not different kinds of people. We are in need of beloved community now more than ever. This technology of nonviolent resistance by putting love into our behavior is not new. We should know better how to do it. And friends, the forces before us are not new to this world either. Fascism has been in flavor and fashion for the majority of human history. I want to remind us, about 3,000 years ago, much, much longer ago than we're talking, a fascist regime known as the Pharaohs of Egypt brutally dominated an ethnically segregated civilization, engineering great works of architecture at the hands of slave laborers. It came time for a revolution, and the enslaved rebelled, led by a single prophet, Moses, and guided by the metaphysical miracles of their God. The Hebrew people left Egypt and searched for their identity and home. And they found Canaan. The contents of the Torah is specific and liberationist at heart. The story of Israel and its troubled relationships with empires are tragic and wonderful. They are miraculous and troubling. It leaves us in the same context of imperial domination that we find Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaking from. This is the same time when Nazi Germany had recently made its primary enemy the children of Judaism. The book of Exodus has been lifted time and time again, not least of which by our own Dr. King, as evidence of the liberationist arc of history. In our land acknowledgement, we acknowledge the original cultivators and caretakers of this land, the Lenape, and as we trace the history of every land back further and further, we encounter a time before human ownership. Now, this context compels me to continue reading the passage from our reading today by Robert Allen Warrior. If you'll indulge me in one moment. The liberationist picture of this God is not complete. A delivered people is not a free people, nor is it a nation. People who have survived the nightmare of subjugation dream of escape. Once the victims have been delivered, they often seek a new dream, a new goal, usually a place of safety away from oppressors, a place that can be defended against future subjugation. Israel's new dream became the land of Canaan, and God was still with them. God promised to go before the people and give them Canaan with its flowing milk and honey. The land God decided belonged to these former slaves from Egypt. God planned on giving it to them, using the same power used against the Egyptians to defend the indigenous inhabitants of Canaan. The deliverer has become the conqueror. The obvious characters in the story for me, this is Robert Allen Warrior's words, for me to identify with are the Canaanites, the people who already lived in the Promised Land. As a member of the Osage Nation of American Indians who stand in solidarity with other tribal people around the world, I read the Exodus story with Canaanite eyes. And it is the Canaanite side of the story that has been overlooked by those seeking to articulate theories of liberation. Especially ignored are those parts of the story that describe God's command to mercilessly annihilate the indigenous population. So then, church, what do we do? A community of artists known as the New Red Order, based in the Lower East Side, tell us clearly what should be done. Give it back. Two of the biggest indigenous exports are art and spirituality, an RO member named Adam tells us. They couch their demand, give it back, in woozy New Age spiritual language of self-help. The New Red Order are an activist group seeking to lift up and explicate the issues pertaining to the indigenous community today. It's not that shocking to hear Native people calling for giving land back, Adam says. But it is kind of shocking to hear the settlers say, "Oh yeah, I gave that back." The New Red Order collects examples of repatriated land displayed on placards that parody the listings of realtors' windows. You can find them plastered all throughout the Lower East Side, throughout our city, and most specifically in the New Red Order's new installation that you can find in Queens. As we consider the implications of these realities and of Indigenous Peoples Day this year, it is so important for me to remind us all, we are not different people. These issues that plague us all. Rich Snyder owned a home in Colorado that he gave to Christine Sleeter, an education activist and professor emerita, when he learned that $250,000 that he had inherited was derived from the sale of stolen Ute land. If you have something that's been stolen, and you know who stole it from whom, she tells us, what do you then do with that? The money went to the Ute tribe. It is daunting, even scary, to consider the meaning of these behaviors, church, and it is even scarier to consider what it means for we who have so much to give it back. But I tell you, beloved community can be achieved through an unshaken commitment to people. That is to say, not people of different kinds, but peoples of the same kind, because we are all the same kind of people. Remember, the problems that plague us today are the same that plagued us 70 years ago, 300 years ago, 700 years ago. 3,000 years ago, the problems that plagued the peoples of Egypt, even the Hebrews, were the same problems. Our histories cannot be ignored, but must be contextualized and understood. And the questions that our ancestors had to grapple with were not different questions then. How do we survive the heavy hand of organized violence? How do we survive the tyranny of the war machine? And how do we live when the world is crumbling beneath our feet? Now, I lean in particular upon the vision and witness of Dr. King, because beloved community is justice. Beloved community is love, and beloved community is our inheritance. Beloved community is not just for an oppressed group. Beloved community is for all people. As Dr. King often told us, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I imagine you know that quote. Dr. King felt that justice could not be parceled out to individuals or groups, but was the birthright of every human being in the beloved community, because people are people. There are not different kinds. Dr. King tells us, I have fought too long and hard against segregated public accommodations to end up segregating my moral concerns. Dr. King tells us justice is indivisible. Friends, people are people, and as we consider the implications of our shared life as people on stolen land, let us remember first that we are just like they. We and they are small words compared to the bigger and more effective word, us. Let us be an us. The air we breathe is shared by all around us. Fascism isn't new, neither is colonialism, but these are not excuses to shy away from our shared human history. So, church, let's build beloved community together. We can start now, but our future and our world may just depend on it. Amen. Please join me in singing our response, Blue Boat Home. Thank you. Life at Community Church is busy, whether we are online or in person. It is our hope that wherever you are and in whatever way you are comfortable engaging in the mission and ministry of this church, we have provided opportunities for you. On Saturday, October 14th, from 2 to 3:30 p.m. on Zoom, the Anti-Racism Action Group is offering a presentation entitled "The Realities of Racism, a Communal Discussion." I will be presenting along with our own David Strawn, and all are invited. Which is just in time to say hello to David Strawn. On Wednesday, October 18th at 7 p.m., our own David will share more about his life and thoughts via Zoom in a continuation of our regular program, Say Hello To, led by Janet Koplos. We will use the 212-683-4988 Zoom room for that. UU World, the national magazine, is coming to Community Church on October 22nd. That's 2 Sundays from now. They are coming because they're interested in our dance ministry. Please come and bring all of your friends. Our ushers will now pass a plate around for our collection. The money we collect on Sundays goes to supporting our music program, BJ and Helene's shelter, and many other ministries of this church. All gifts offered are accepted in gratitude. Please join me as we together recite our extinguishing words. Knowing how quickly the flame of truth may be extinguished, how easily the chalice of fellowship broken, let us be vigilant in faith, keep peace in our hearts, and make care for one another the watchword of our lives together. So our light goes out everywhere into the world. Our light goes out into the world where healing and hope are needed, perhaps now more than ever. Let us go to love and serve the world and one another. Amen.